I was still holding the bowl of jollof rice I'd spent the whole morning preparing when my son, Daniel, stepped into the hallway with that tight, uncomfortable look he gets when he's about to say something he knows will wound me. "Mom, you need to leave." At first, I thought I misheard him. The laughter from the living room, the clinking cutlery, the music playing for the small family dinner, it all felt too normal for those words to make sense. "Leave?" I asked quietly. But dinner hasn't even started. Daniel wouldn't look me in the eye. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as if someone was pushing him from behind. And then she appeared. Vivian's mother. My daughter-in-law's personal judge, jury, and executioner. Perfect hair. Perfect jewelry. Perfect sneer. "I told him to tell you," she said, stepping into the hallway like she owned the house. "This dinner is for family, and you're making everyone uncomfortable." My heart stopped. Uncomfortable? I had only arrived 10 minutes ago. I hadn't even taken off my shoes. I hadn't said anything besides good evening. What did I do? I whispered. She gave a cold little laugh. "It's not about what you did. It's about what you always do. Hovering. Inserting yourself. Making everything about you." She waved her hand dismissively. "It's best if you leave before things get awkward." Before I could answer, she leaned closer and whispered, loud enough for the cousins and aunties nearby to hear. "Besides, you weren't really invited. Not by me." The room went silent. Guests pretended not to stare, but I could feel their eyes burning holes through me. Vivian looked away, pretending to fuss with the cutlery. My own son stood there like a child afraid of two teachers fighting. "Daniel," I said softly, "is this really what you want?" He swallowed hard. "Mom, please. Just go." It felt like someone punctured my chest. I carefully placed the bowl of rice on the console table, straightened my blouse, and took one last look at my family, at the home I helped them furnish, at the son I raised with everything in me. They wouldn't meet my eyes. I walked out, each step heavier than the last. I never thought my own family would side with a stranger until the moment they shoved me out of my own son's home. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. I want to see who's watching this hungry heart turn into steel. Before I tell you what I did next, hit like if you've ever been taken for granted by someone you loved. This one's long, so get comfortable. I'll take you back to the moment everything started to slip. Trust me, you'll want to hear how a quiet woman who raised 3 kids and paid for a dozen family celebrations quietly stopped being the family ATM, and how that decision changed everything. 3 weeks earlier, my mornings looked the same way they had for years. Biscuit crumbs on the counter, a kettle that whistled like clockwork at 7, and me moving through the small apartment I'd kept tidy since Richard left. I've never been a woman who made a scene. I was the practical one. The one who fixed the plumbing, balanced the checkbook, and remembered every birthday. People called me dependable. My children called me Nana. My friends called me Steady Helen. I liked that part of myself. It felt useful. When Sarah first called that morning, her voice was the kind I learned to recognize, the nervous little hitch that meant bills or trouble. "Mom," she said, "David lost his job." My spoon stopped halfway to the cup. David had the charm of a salesman and the steady track record of a man who couldn't keep a desk for long. The first few times he lost work, it was one of those things, layoffs, reorgs, bad timing. But this time Sarah's voice trembled in a way that made my chest ache. "We put down deposits for Jake's birthday," she said, words spilling fast like someone trying to outrun a dread. $5,000. The venue, the DJ, the petting zoo, the whole thing. We can't cancel. He's already told his friends. He's so excited. $5,000. That number landed like a brick in my stomach, but not because I didn't understand how much a celebration meant to a child. I'd been that child once, eyes wide at the wonders adults made for us, but because I knew the pattern. There was always a reason why their bills ballooned, always a promise that will pay you back, always a softness in Sarah's voice that softened my resolve. "Mom," she whispered, "please." The last time she'd whispered like that, I'd covered an emergency car repair. The time before, I'd helped with groceries. When they bought the house, I'd written the check for the down payment. Those things are small in the ledger of love until you count them up and realize they've become the ledger itself, not a ledger of help but an expectation. A line item in their budget labeled, Nana's money. I told her to breathe. I asked questions. What's the backup plan? Have you spoken to the caterer? Will you need help with setup? My voice was steady because my hands had always been steady. But inside, part of me bristled. Part of me remembered the days I ran a busy office, shouting over phones and calendars, the woman who had negotiated invoices and managed people without tears. Where had she gone? How did I become the one who soothed and covered and quietly replenished? Sarah said they would pay me back. She said it like a promise, a string of words she meant. We'll pay you back when David finds something. We'll set up a plan. I knew promises like that. They had weighed at first, then slowly dissolved into polite excuses. But when I heard Jake giggling in the background, imagining the bounce house and the sugar-frosted cake, the no lodged in my throat and I found myself saying, okay, I'll cover it. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the checkbook like it was a puzzle I should not have agreed to solve. $5,000 was a chunk of my retirement cushion, the money I'd set aside for small comforts. A trip to visit my sister in San Francisco, a replacement roof if the house ever needed it, a little nest egg for medical surprises. I wrote the check anyway. Not because I couldn't be firm, but because I wanted my grandson to have a bright day in a world where grown-up problems often shaded the corners. What I didn't know then was that the money would not buy gratitude. It would buy a performance. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah called twice a week with updates. Decorations booked, the DJ confirmed, and a custom cake that would make the headline of the neighborhood WhatsApp group. Each time she spoke, a new detail crept in. Also, Mom, could you pick up the cake? The bakery needs payment on pickup. Or, can you come early and help set up? I'll be running around. Small asks that felt like a gentle theft, a constant addition to the tab I'd already agreed to pay. I noticed the first warning like a soft whisper. The way Sarah paused when she talked about Margaret. Margaret, she said once, was coming up from Seattle. She said she couldn't miss Jake's birthday, Sarah said, like the information should comfort me. Instead, it felt like a needle. Margaret was Daniel's mother-in-law by marriage, a woman with that kind of easy wealth that tells in the way it moves through a room. She always brought gifts that required receipts, stories about charity boards, vacation snaps that smelled faintly of money. I'm sure Jake will have a wonderful time, I said carefully, though the words felt thin. Sarah's voice brightened as she described how Margaret was helping with arrangements. A small, cold part of me tightened. The second warning tightened its hold the morning. She asked what time I would come as a guest, not as a helper. What time should I arrive as a guest? I asked. You'll be there already, she said. The laugh she offered at the end felt thin and rehearsed. That should have been my first warning. But love and habit are patient thieves. I folded napkins, polished the good spoons, and told myself that family is messy, that small slights can be smoothed over with generosity. I delivered the check and the cash collaterals I'd promised, and the relief in Sarah's voice was something I hadn't heard in months. I delivered the cake the morning of the party, and I arrived early as she'd asked, to help with last-minute details. I taped helium balloons, adjusted centerpieces, and smoothed a napkin that had slid crooked. While I worked, I smiled at the children and told a joke that made Jake laugh. He hugged me, that raw, unguarded hug of a child who loves without thought. For a couple of minutes, the world narrowed to the vibrating, honest thing that was the child in my arms. Then, in the middle of the laughter and the clatter of plates, the next warning arrived. Heavier than the rest, a blade disguised as a polite voice. It was Margaret, standing at the edge of the decorated hall, arms folded across her chest, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval as she inspected everything I had spent hours helping to arrange. She didn't greet me. She didn't smile. She didn't even nod. She simply looked around and said, loudly enough for two parents nearby to hear, I can see we'll have to redo a few things. This isn't exactly the standard I had in mind. My fingers tightened around the roll of tape in my hand. Not because of the words, but because of the way Sarah turned away like she hadn't heard anything. I should have known then that the ground beneath me had already shifted. Margaret walked over, heels clicking against the glossy floor, each step deliberate, like she owned the venue. Her eyes swept over the table I'd just set, the stack of party favors I'd sorted, and finally landed on me. "You're here early," she said, voice dripping with that polite condescension wealthy people use like perfume. "How helpful." I forced a smile. "Just doing what I can for Jake." She tilted her head as if she were examining a peculiar object. "Yes, well, some of us don't like too many cooks in the kitchen. It becomes confusing for the children." Confusing for the children? As if Jake didn't run into my arms every time he saw me. As if I hadn't been the one picking him up from school when Sarah had late shifts. As if I wasn't the one who stayed up for 3 nights when he had the flu. Before I could speak, she patted my arm, lightly, like one might pat a dog that had wandered into the wrong room. "But don't worry. I'll take over from here." And just like that, she dismissed me. Sarah didn't intervene. Daniel didn't intervene. Not one person in that room glanced my way except with that awkward, guilty smile people wear when they witness something uncomfortable but don't want to get involved. I stepped back quietly, swallowing the sting. When the first parents arrived and began marveling at the decorations I paid for, decorations I had arranged, Margaret was already in front of them, smiling graciously, saying, "Oh, yes, we pulled everything together beautifully, didn't we?"
We.
She didn't even pretend to include me in that we. She motioned toward Sarah. Sarah nodded like a dutiful daughter-in-law. And me? I stood there holding a stray balloon ribbon, like I had wandered into the wrong life. Later, while everyone fussed over last-minute touches, I overheard Margaret telling an auntie, "You know how some people overstep. It's better to keep boundaries. That's why I always take charge. It's for the best." The auntie murmured in agreement, not realizing Margaret was talking about me. I could feel the humiliation creeping into my bones. But I bit my tongue. I told myself, it's Jake's day. Don't make a scene. Don't give them more reason to look down on you. So I quietly moved to the side, pretending to check my phone. That was when Sarah handed me her car keys and said, "Mom, could you go get the extra cutlery from the trunk? Margaret says we'll need it." Margaret says. Margaret says. Margaret says. I was beginning to realize that in this house, in this family, Margaret's word had become law. I forced a smile and took the keys. Because that's what I did. That's who I had always been. The dependable mother. The quiet helper. The one who filled in the cracks. But as I walked toward the parking lot, the roll of humiliation tightened in my stomach. Each request, each dismissal, each patronizing little comment, they weren't random. They were a pattern forming. A noose tightening around the place I once held in my son's life. That should have been my first warning. But it wasn't the last. And I had no idea that the real blow, the one that would shatter everything, was waiting for me just a week later, on the night of that family dinner. The night they would tell me to leave my own son's home, as if I were an uninvited stranger. A night that would change everything. If I had paid closer attention, I would have realized the universe was whispering the truth long before it screamed it. The next warning came quietly, like an insult disguised as a compliment. 3 days after the party, Sarah called me while folding laundry. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was doing. She just sighed and said, "Mom, Margaret thinks maybe you try too hard." My hand froze on the dish towel. Try too hard? At what? At everything, she said, like it was obvious. She said sometimes you make people uncomfortable because you hover. Hover. A word used for insects. Not mothers. Not grandmothers who raised your daughter with scraped knuckles and sleepless nights. "Did you say that?" I asked her.
No.
"Of course not," she replied too quickly. "I'm just, you know how Margaret is. She's very protective of boundaries." I swallowed the sting. Because it was easier than asking why my own daughter had begun parroting Margaret's opinions. That should have been my first warning, I whispered to myself after we hung up. But it wasn't. Oh no. The universe still had more to reveal. On Sunday, there was a neighborhood barbecue, one Sarah had mentioned casually the week before. I baked a pan of brownies and ironed a fresh blouse. Just as I reached for my handbag, my phone buzzed. Sarah, Mom, don't worry about coming after all. It's mostly Margaret's side of the family. You won't know anyone. My hands shook slightly. I typed back. Should I still bring the brownies? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, Margaret already brought dessert. Thanks though. Thanks though? Though? I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. Another warning. Another subtle nudge out the door of my own family. 2 days later, Sarah called again, voice apologetic. Mom, could you transfer $350 to me? It's just for Jake's school trip. Margaret offered, but you know how she is, she'll never let us forget it. The words felt like vinegar on a wound. So you'd rather I forget it? I asked quietly. Silence. Then she whispered, Mom, don't make this harder. We really need your help. I stared at the bank app on my phone. I had already paid for the birthday, the cake, the decorations, the extra gifts, and the emergency groceries last month, and the babysitting hours no one accounted for. But I transferred the money anyway, because Jake, because Sarah, because love can blind you even when your eyes are open. But as the transfer processed, something twisted hard beneath my ribs, like a quiet rebellion waking up. And still, the warnings weren't over. It happened on a Thursday. Sarah called again, but her voice was different. Tense, irritated. Mom? Margaret said Jake gets confused when you give him advice. Confused about what? I asked. She said you tell him things about life that don't align with how we're raising him. I felt heat rush to my cheeks. What things, Sarah? I help him with homework. I tell him to be kind. I tell him to speak up for himself. That's the problem, she snapped suddenly. Then softer. You're too intense. Jake ends up thinking he can argue with adults. I took a slow breath. So, you're saying I should teach him to be quiet? To fold? To accept whatever adults tell him? Silence. Then, Mom, you can be overbearing sometimes. Margaret says. Ah. There it was. The name. Everything always seemed to circle back to what Margaret said. I wasn't competing with another mother-in-law. I was competing with a queen in her own kingdom, one who had recently claimed my family as subjects. And Sarah? My sweet girl? She was being molded like soft clay by a woman who didn't raise her, a woman who didn't love her, a woman who didn't sacrifice for her. And I was slowly being erased. The final blow, the one that cracked everything open, came during a family dinner at my son's home. The same dinner where the story began, the same night they threw me out with words sharp enough to leave scars. But what pushed them to that point started in the kitchen, 20 minutes before the guests arrived. I had come early because Sarah asked me. I wore my best blouse, because Daniel said it would be a special evening. I brought a homemade casserole because Jake always begged for it. I stepped inside, smiling, ready to help set up. And froze. There she was, Margaret, standing at the stove like SHE owned the place, stirring a pot like SHE controlled the menu, giving orders to my daughter-in-law like SHE ran the household. She said when she finally looked up. You're here. Just you're here. Not hello. Not welcome. Not thank you for the casserole. Before I could reply, she added, next time, let us know before you bring food. We already have a full menu. Sarah shifted uncomfortably beside her. I asked Mom to bring something, she said. Margaret didn't even look at her as she replied. Yes, well, we need to set better boundaries. Your mother tends to over-insert herself. The room went so silent, even the pot simmering on the stove felt loud. Sarah bit her lip. Daniel looked away. And I felt something inside me slowly, painfully tear. I placed the casserole on the counter. Should I put it away then? I asked softly. Margaret waved a dismissive hand. We'll see if there's room.
That
That was the moment the humiliation peaked. That was the crack in the ice right before the plunge. 20 minutes later, she would tell them to kick me out. My son would obey. My daughter-in-law would watch.
guests would stare. And
I would leave, carrying nothing but the weight of betrayal. But as I walked out that night, the night phase one opened on, I didn't know yet that fate was already turning in my direction. I didn't know that this humiliation would become the spark for my greatest transformation. I only knew one thing. They had gone too far. I don't remember the drive home. I remember the front door clicking shut behind me. I remember the silence of my living room pressing in like a heavy blanket. I remember standing in the dark with my purse still hanging from my shoulder, my keys still in my hand, my heart still stuttering from the shock. But most of all, I remember the moment I finally broke. Not with tears, not with rage, not even with fear. It was laughter. A small, disbelieving laugh, one that slipped out before I could stop it. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, I was laughing hysterically, doubled over, one hand gripping the armrest, tears finally spilling down my face, but not from sadness. From realization. From the absurdity of it all. From the pain of understanding something so clearly, it almost felt like enlightenment. I had allowed them to treat me this way. Not intentionally, not willingly, but slowly, bit by bit, over years of trying to keep peace, trying to keep family together, trying to help, trying to give, trying to be understanding, trying to avoid conflict. I had chipped away so much of myself that there was barely anything left but a smile and a checkbook. And Margaret, oh Margaret, she didn't destroy me. She simply exposed the truth. I had made myself easy to erase. When the laughter died, the silence that followed wasn't empty.
it was clarifying.
I walked to the bathroom mirror. My hair was slightly frizzed from the evening humidity. My blouse was still neat. My necklace sat just right. But my eyes were blazing. I stared at my reflection and whispered, "Enough." That single word vibrated through my bones. Enough of being dismissed. Enough of being used. Enough of being quiet. Enough of being grateful for crumbs. Enough of swallowing humiliation like it was part of motherhood. I wasn't weak. I wasn't fragile. I wasn't an inconvenience. I was the woman who kept this family afloat for years. I was the woman who raised a child with nothing but grit and love. I was the woman who could balance a budget, calm a storm, fix a crisis, long before a woman like Margaret even knew the meaning of responsibility. I leaned closer to the mirror, wiped my tears, and said it again, louder. Enough. That was the moment the shift happened. The moment the soft, quiet version of me, the one they expected, retired. I could feel the old me waking up. The me who once ran an entire department at work without breaking a sweat. The me who negotiated contracts, confronted unfair bosses, and navigated real-life crises with competence they couldn't fathom. The me who didn't need approval to exist. She stepped forward. She took the wheel. I straightened my shoulders, and I began planning. The humiliation wasn't the end. It was the catalyst. Because when a kind person finally snaps, not in rage but in clarity, it's the kind of transformation that can rearrange the entire balance of power. I picked up my phone, not to cry to anyone, not to beg for an apology, but to call someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. Someone who didn't tolerate nonsense. Someone who understood boundaries like a religion. My sister. I pressed her name, and before she could even say hello, I said, "May, I need help." She inhaled sharply. What happened? They crossed the line. Her voice hardened instantly. Tell me everything.
I did.
Every detail. Every insult. Every humiliation. Every cut disguised as courtesy. By the time I finished, her voice was low and cold. Helen, they think you're soft. They think you won't fight back. I exhaled shakily. I know. So what now? She asked. A slow, deliberate calm washed over me.
Now?
Now I stopped being predictable. Now I stopped being quiet. Now I stopped letting them define who I am and what I deserve. Now, I take back control. That was the moment I stopped crying and started planning. I wasn't angry. I was something else entirely. Something they never expected. Something they would never be prepared for. I remembered exactly who I used to be before they wore me down.
And now,
They were about to meet her. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I was restless, but because I was ready. I made a cup of tea, sat at the dining table, and pulled out a notebook, the same one I used years ago when budgeting 3 jobs worth of income into a single mother's survival plan. Old instincts returned like muscle memory. I wrote 4 words at the top of the page. They crossed a line. Below it, I made 3 columns.
who hurt me?
What leverage do I have? What outcome do I want? As I filled in each row, my hands stopped trembling. My mind sharpened. My spine straightened. This wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. This was correction, realignment, restoration of dignity. And nothing restores balance better than clarifying the facts in public, which meant I needed allies. People who understood precision. People who didn't buckle under pressure. So I made the first call. My sister answered on the second ring.
Morning, she said.
You sound awake. Too awake. I am, I replied, my voice steady. And I need something from you, May. Say the word. I need someone who knows how to gather information quietly. Someone who can help me verify things like who said what, who planned what, who signed for what, and who paid for what. A slow smile formed in her tone. You want me to talk to Julius? I closed my eyes. Julius, her childhood friend, now an administrator who heard everything in a town where secrets traveled faster than cars. Yes, I said. I want to know exactly what Margaret has been saying about me behind closed doors. I'll call him within the hour, May replied. Helen, this is long overdue.
It was.
And now I had someone who could trace words back to their sources. But information was only one part of the plan. I needed logistics. My second call was to the coordinator of an upcoming family event, a dinner Sarah had talked about for weeks. A dinner Margaret had been bragging about hosting. A dinner they assumed I wouldn't attend.
Perfect.
When the event coordinator picked up, I put on my calmest, most professional voice, the one I hadn't used in years but still fit me like a well-tailored suit. Good morning, I began. My name is Helen. I'm calling regarding the Caldwell family dinner next week. Yes, the coordinator asked politely. I'm the one who actually secured the original reservation and paid the refundable deposit. A small lie, a strategic one. Because the truth didn't matter here. What mattered was shifting the power dynamic.
Oh.
I wasn't aware, the coordinator replied. How can I assist? I need to make a few adjustments and add a note to the reservation, I said. Confidential notes. Yes, of course. Over the next 10 minutes, I outlined exactly what I wanted done. A seating arrangement change. A specific introduction to be made at the top of the dinner. A prepared announcement crediting me for something significant Margaret planned to claim credit for. A document to be shared discreetly to certain guests. The coordinator sounded increasingly curious. This is unusual, she finally said. It's necessary, I replied. And confidential? Completely. By the time we hung up, the foundation was set. But there was one more call left, the most important one. The one that would tilt the entire situation forward like a domino. I took a deep breath before dialing Sarah. She picked up immediately. Mom, she sounded cautious. Are you okay? About the other night? I'm fine, I said softly. I just want peace. Truly. A pause. Then relief washed through her voice. Oh, Mom, I'm so glad. Margaret said you might overreact. I held the phone slightly away to hide my smirk. Good. Let them believe I was retreating. I'm not overreacting, I said gently. I just want you to enjoy your dinner next week. You and Margaret. I won't interrupt anything. Her exhale was long and shaky. She had expected an argument, not calm surrender. Thank you, Mom. Really. You're welcome. I almost ended the call but added sweetly, "Oh, and Sarah? Make sure everyone is there on time. I wouldn't want anyone to miss what's coming." "What's coming?" she asked. "Just a little clarity," I said. "See you soon." Then I hung up. I placed the phone on the table. The plan was set. The pieces were moving. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt powerful. Not angry, not bitter, just certain. Because this time, I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was acting intentionally, quietly, strategically, with a steadiness Margaret would never see coming. The next phase would not be polite. It would not be quiet. And it would not be subtle. But it would be deserved. And it would be unforgettable. The day of the dinner arrived with the kind of quiet tension that feels like the air itself is holding its breath. I woke up early, but not out of nerves. Out of certainty. I put on a soft cream blouse, simple black slacks, and the pearl earrings my late mother left me. Nothing flashy. Nothing loud. Just dignified. The kind of dignity people forget you have until you stand up straighter than they ever expected. I made tea. I watered the plants. I read a few pages of a book, then marked my place with a small card. I was calm, because I knew what was coming. Because I no longer needed to fight for a place in their lives. I only needed to fight for the truth. And tonight, the truth had a reservation. By 6:15 p.m., the guests had already started arriving at the upscale restaurant Sarah and Margaret had chosen. The venue was expensive, polished, and intentionally impressive. Margaret's kind of space. The kind where she could glide around like royalty, touching napkins, adjusting cutlery, pretending she had orchestrated everything. And she did exactly that. According to the coordinator, she arrived early, took credit for the decor, corrected the staff 3 times, and clinked her glass to make an unofficial welcome speech.
Typical.
I wasn't there. Not yet. Because the plan didn't require me to be present. Not in the beginning. At 6:40 p.m., my phone buzzed.
May.
Julius confirmed it. "Margaret's been telling people you begged to be included and embarrass the family. He has recordings." Good.
Perfect.
Exactly the leverage I needed.
I didn't reply.
I didn't need to. Pieces were already moving. By 7 p.m., the dinner was in full swing. Margaret held court at the head of the long rectangular table, basking in attention like it was sunlight. Sarah sat quietly beside her, occasionally glancing toward the door, perhaps wondering whether I would show up after all. Daniel sat stiffly, as though he sensed an invisible storm rolling toward him. But I was at home, slicing fruit, watching the clock with the composure of a woman who had finally remembered her worth. At 7:15 p.m., right as the appetizers were being served, the event coordinator tapped her spoon against a glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said brightly, "before dinner continues, we have a brief announcement." Margaret's eyebrows lifted. She had been expecting this moment. She assumed the coordinator was about to thank her, give her credit, praise her influence, hand her the spotlight. But instead, the coordinator smiled warmly and said, "I'd like to extend a special acknowledgement to the person who arranged the initial reservation, secured the deposit, and coordinated several key parts of tonight's program." Margaret straightened proudly. "Please join me in thanking." The coordinator paused, intentionally. Let the suspense build. Let every eye shift toward Margaret. Then she finished. "Mrs. Helen Caldwell." Silence. A sharp, cutting silence. Daniel blinked. Sarah gasped softly. Guests looked around, confused. And Margaret? Her smile froze mid-expression, like someone had unplugged her. "Helen," she repeated, voice cracking. What? That's ridiculous. I planned everything." The coordinator, ever professional, replied, "Oh, I'm sorry for the confusion. The reservation system lists Mrs. Caldwell as the original contact. She also left specific notes for tonight's sequence."
It was a perfect lie.
A strategic, truth-adjacent misdirection. One that didn't need to be factual, only public. And public it was. People began murmuring. "She arranged it?" But I thought Margaret said, "Wait, didn't she claim? The seeds of doubt had been planted. At 7:23 p.m., the next phase hit. Right as the first entree was being served, the waiter discreetly placed small sealed envelopes in front of 4 guests. Daniel, Sarah, Margaret, and Margaret's sister. Margaret frowned. "What is this?" The coordinator, with perfect timing, replied, "Requests from the original reservation holder." "Oh, please," Margaret scoffed. "This is absurd. What could Helen possibly have to say?" She tore the envelope open and froze. Inside was a printout of 3 things. A digital receipt of the $5,000 I paid for Jake's party. A screenshot of Sarah's messages asking for help. A transcript of Margaret telling someone, "Helen needs to stop trying so hard to be relevant. She's embarrassing." Her face drained of color. Sarah's envelope had the same, plus a note written in my handwriting. "You don't need to choose between being kind and being truthful. Tonight, you'll see which one frees you." Daniel's envelope had the recordings Julius gathered. Margaret bad-mouthing me to him, to the guests, to neighbors. And Margaret's sister's envelope held a simple statement. Ask her why she lied. Ask her who really paid. Ask her who she's been manipulating. Ask her why she told them to throw me out. One by one, their faces fell. And around them, whispers swelled like rising water. My phone buzzed.
Once. Twice.
5 times. 7. Daniel. Mom, please pick up. Sarah. What is happening? Why did you do this? Unknown number. Mrs. Caldwell, this is the restaurant manager. Can we? Margaret. This is childish.
Call me now.
Again, Margaret.
HELUN.
I smiled and ignored every call because the plan wasn't finished. They weren't even at the hardest part yet. At 7:35 p.m., the coordinator tapped her glass again. There is one final note to share, she announced. Per the reservation request, Margaret paled. She whispered harshly to Sarah, "Do something." But Sarah was frozen. The coordinator lifted the small card I had written. Tonight, this family dinner is dedicated to honesty, to clarity, and to recognizing the person who has quietly supported this family in ways many may not know. Another pause. And then, Mrs. Caldwell has chosen not to attend tonight. She hopes the truth shared this evening allows everyone here to reflect.
Gasps. Actual gasps.
A few people clapped awkwardly. Some turned towards Sarah and Daniel with pity. Others glared at Margaret. And Margaret? She stood. Then she erupted. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "She's manipulating all of you. She wants attention. She wants control. But her voice cracked under the weight of every whisper in the room. Didn't she say Helen was clingy? I thought she paid for the party. I heard Margaret saying things last time. So Helen was telling the truth? She treated her like that and expected no consequences? Her authority was unraveling, and everyone could see it. Sarah stood suddenly, tears spilling. "Mom, oh God," she whispered. Not to Margaret.
To me.
Into the phone, she kept calling. Into the truth she finally saw laid bare. She rushed out of the restaurant to call again. I let it ring twice, then answered. Her voice cracked like glass. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you show me sooner?" "Because, Sarah," I said calmly, "you wouldn't have heard me."
She sobbed.
"I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. Behind her, I could hear shouting, Margaret's voice rising, Daniel trying to calm her, guests muttering. Chaos.
Pure spiraling chaos.
And I sat in my quiet living room, sipping my tea, watching the night sky darken.
Calm, steady, whole.
Before Sarah hung up, she whispered, "Mom, what do I do?" And I said the line that shifted the balance forever. Tell the truth. For once. Tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may. She inhaled shakily, then walked back inside. And from the recordings Julius shared later, the moment she spoke up was the moment everything broke. Mom didn't embarrass us.
You did.
All of this is on you, Margaret. She paid for that whole party. She helped us. She loved us. And you made us treat her like she was nothing. The room exploded, not with laughter, not with applause, but with awareness. And Margaret? For the first time since she entered our lives, she had no words. The next morning felt like a slow drum. The sun rose as usual, but the world smelled different, sharper, honest. The messages on my phone had multiplied overnight. Stunned texts, angry voicemails, a few kind notes from neighbors who'd seen the commotion, and one pleading call from Daniel. It rang and rang until I picked up. He sounded hollow. Mom, can you come over?
Please.
We need to talk. I slid into my shoes and drove the few blocks to their house, the quiet car holding the last of my composure like a fragile box. When I arrived, the front door was open and the living room looked like a field after a storm. Cups overturned, half-drunk glasses, evidence of a night that had roared and then died. Margaret was there, of course. She stood by the mantel like a queen in mourning, arms folded, mouth a hard line. Her face was pale, less with shock than with outrage. She met my eyes like a lawyer meeting an accused. You orchestrated this? She demanded the moment I stepped in, voice low and furious. Is this how you behave? Is this your idea of dignity, Helen? Planting lies, manipulating my family, turning my daughter against me? Her words were sharp, coated with entitlement. She paced slowly, each step a punctuation mark. Behind her, Daniel hovered, looking torn. Sarah stood with her arms crossed but her eyes red, and in the kitchen a few neighbors lingered, the air thick with curiosity. I set my handbag down calmly and folded my hands. Margaret, I said, I didn't orchestrate anything. I simply made sure the truth was heard. The truth, she scoffed. The truth is what I say it is.
No, irraplia.
The truth is what can be shown. Receipts, messages, recordings. Things you've said behind closed doors. Things you told people to make me small. Margaret's nostrils flared. You have no right to broadcast. It wasn't broadcast, I interrupted. It was shared with people who were present tonight, people who needed to know. I didn't humiliate you, Margaret. You humiliated yourself. She lurched forward. You embarrassed me in front of my friends. You brought strangers into our home to shame me. You wanted attention, and now you'll get it. Is that what you think? I asked quietly. That I wanted attention? Her voice rose. You're trying to ruin us. You're trying to make me out to be the villain so your family will rally around you. Sarah flinched, the accusation hitting a nerve. Daniel looked like he might speak, then didn't. I took a breath. Every lesson I'd learned about restraint and principle pressed against my ribs. I didn't want to ruin anyone, I said. I wanted honesty. I wanted my daughter to see what was being said about her mother. I wanted Jake to have the truth available to him as he grows. Margaret laughed, a brittle, incredulous sound. Jake, she repeated, you would do this for a child? By sowing discord? You'd rather see him confused by feuding adults than let me keep the household orderly? You cannot build a household on erasure, I said. You cannot demand gratitude and then dictate who is allowed to receive it. You cannot accept help and then erase the helper. That's ungrateful, Daniel muttered, finally finding his voice. Mom, she's being unfair. She's being dramatic, Margaret snapped. She manipulated the guests. She planted those notes. She paid for the event, You make it sound like money buys relationships, I said. Money cannot buy respect. It buys temporary allegiance at best. It does not buy dignity. Margaret's hand trembled now, not from age, but from fury. You will not treat me like this. She drew herself up. I will not be spoken of like trash. No one has to talk about you like trash, I replied. You did honors to yourself with your actions last night. You made choices. You spoke. You excluded. You decided who is allowed to be part of your life. She advanced, closing the distance between us. You'll pay for this humiliation, she hissed. You're going to regret making me an enemy. For using words? I asked, calm as the tide. Or For what you did to my family?
She looked at Daniel.
You raised her to see slights where there are none. You raised her with this idea that we should all kiss the ground she walks on. We are not children. We are not pawns in her story. Daniel's face crumbled. This is about respect, he said, voice thin. It's about how we treat each other. And how you treated her, I answered, turning to him, is how you let others treat her. The room held its breath. You think you're righteous, Margaret snapped. But you're just a meddler who can't leave well enough alone. I am a mother who loves her grandson, I said. And I will not be erased for your comfort. Silence pressed against the walls, heavy and immediate. The neighbors shifted on their feet, the moral geometry in the room tilting. Then Sarah stepped forward. Her voice was small at first, then steadier. Mom didn't do anything wrong. She helped us. She did what any grandmother would do for a child. If that embarrasses you, maybe you should ask why you needed to make someone invisible to feel important. Margaret's jaw clicked like a lock. Her eyes flashed. For a moment, I thought she might strike out, no, not physically, but with words sharp enough to wound. You think she's the victim, Margaret spat. But she engineered this to humiliate me. She wanted to be the hero. She wanted this drama. Sarah shook her head.
No.
She wanted the truth to be seen. Daniel looked at me, finally, and the lines between us softened. Guilt hovered in his gaze. Mom, he said, so small it was almost lost. I should have defended you. You should have seen, I said. You should have listened. We all should have. Margaret's breath came faster now, and she turned away, as if words alone could build a wall. She collected her coat with hands that trembled and, without another word, left the house. Her departure was not triumphant. It was a retreat. As the door clicked shut, the quiet that followed felt less heavy than it had the night before. It felt like the air settling after a storm has passed. The confrontation had not been a victory in the ways revenge movies show. No one had been physically vanquished. But something fundamental had shifted. The narrative that had allowed me to be small had been dismantled. And in that silence, as I stood in the doorway watching the space Margaret had occupied, I realized that holding boundaries could both wound and heal. I had chosen healing for myself and, ultimately, for my family. A new chapter had begun. One where dignity, not obligation, would be the currency. For a full 24 hours after Margaret stormed out of the house, there was silence. Not peace. Not closure. Silence, the kind that trembles under the surface, the kind that precedes a second wave. I spent the morning cleaning. Not because the house needed it, but because I needed to scrub away the memory of being shoved out of my son's home, the memory of years of quiet tolerance. Cleaning steadied me. It gave my hands something to do, while my mind adjusted to the new dynamic. A family finally seeing the truth. By mid-afternoon, Sarah texted twice, soft, remorseful messages. Mom, can we talk later? I didn't know how much you were holding.
I'm sorry.
Daniel sent one message.
I love you, Mom.
But from Margaret? Nothing. Which meant one thing. She was planning. And she didn't leave me guessing for long. At 4:17 p.m., a firm knock rattled my apartment door. Not tentative. Not friendly. Official. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened it slowly. 2 officers stood there.
Mom?
Are you Helen Caldwell? My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with an icy, anticipatory clarity.
Yes.
How can I help you? One officer lifted a small electronic tablet. We received a report from a Mrs. Margaret Harding alleging harassment and intentional emotional distress. There it was. Her counterstrike. Harassment. I repeated calmly. What exactly did she claim I did? She states that you orchestrated a public defamation attempt at a family gathering last night, the officer replied, glancing at his notes. She says you spread false information, created a hostile environment, and intentionally damaged her reputation. I almost laughed. Of course she framed herself as the victim. Of course she tried to weaponize authority. This was classic. When social power fails, try legal intimidation. But intimidation requires fear. and I wasn't afraid anymore. I see, I said, leaning lightly against the doorframe. Would you like to come in while I explain what actually happened? They entered politely, sitting on my couch while I offered water. They declined. One officer clicked on the tablet. You're not in trouble, ma'am. We just need to hear your side to file a balanced report. Balanced? How ironic. First, I began. I have receipts for every payment I made for that event. Second, I have voice messages, text messages, and witnesses who can testify to what Margaret said about me. And third, I opened a folder on the coffee table, the one May had helped me compile. I have recordings from last week. The officers exchanged a glance. Recordings of what? One asked. Of Margaret calling me irrelevant. Of her telling people I wasn't welcome in my own family. Of her instructing my son to throw me out of his house. The younger officer let out a slow exhale. Ma'am, these directly contradict her claims. I know, I said, which is why she filed them. Manipulators always escalate when exposure threatens them. I slid the most damning transcript across the table. Margaret's voice saying, Helen tries too hard. She's embarrassing. I told Daniel she shouldn't be around us so much. The older officer took a long moment to read it. Mrs. Caldwell, these recordings significantly changed the context. Exactly, I replied. He stood, smoothing his uniform. We're closing the complaint. Based on what we've seen, you're not the aggressor. The younger officer added gently, If anything, ma'am, you might want to file your own report if you feel endangered or defamed. I shook my head.
No.
I want this resolved quietly. I just want my family to see the truth. He nodded with understanding. Sometimes dignity speaks louder than legal action. As they stepped out, the older officer paused. For what it's worth, you handled this with composure most people don't have. I closed the door behind them. For a moment, I just stood there breathing. Not shaken. Not rattled. Empowered. Because Margaret's attempt to weaponize the law had fizzled before it ignited, and now she had created a paper trail that only weakened her position. But the storm wasn't over. It was shifting. Within the hour, Daniel called. Sarah called. Even two of Margaret's cousins called. I ignored all but my son. His voice trembled.
Mom.
Margaret told everyone you called the police on her. I sighed. I didn't call anyone. She did. I know, he whispered, voice cracking. I know because the officers came here too. They told us she filed a complaint. Good. Let the truth unfold in every direction. Mom, he said, breath unsteady. She's telling people you're trying to break up the family. I closed my eyes. Daniel, I said softly, families don't break because of truth. They break because of lies. He didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was small. I think we're starting to see that. By evening, Margaret had launched her next attack. A social one. She posted on Facebook. It's sad when people can't respect boundaries and resort to dramatic stunts for attention. Real family knows the truth. No names. But everyone knew. Within minutes, comments started piling in. Is this about last night? I heard something happened at the dinner. Who caused the scene? Margaret responded selectively. Some people don't know their place. I'm protecting my family, but the tide was turning. Another comment appeared beneath hers. Funny. I heard Helen actually paid for everything. Why erase her? More comments followed. I saw her envelope. The receipts looked real. Are you sure you're telling the whole story? Margaret, this isn't looking good. Within an hour, the post was deleted. But screenshots circulated. They always do. And Margaret's carefully curated reputation was now developing cracks the size of truth. By nightfall, Daniel and Sarah arrived at my door. Not angry this time, not defensive, not confused. Just ashamed. And desperate to talk. But that conversation was something deeper, something that would lead directly into the next phase of the story. Because the real shock, the revelation that would turn everything upside down, was still waiting beneath the surface. And when it arrived, It would destroy the last piece of Margaret's power. When Daniel and Sarah arrived that night, they didn't knock politely. They knocked like people begging for a door to open into forgiveness. I opened it slowly. Sarah's eyes were swollen from crying. Daniel looked as if he'd aged 10 years in a single day. Their shoulders sagged with the weight of embarrassment, guilt, and something else.
Fear.
Not of me. Of the truth they had been forced to confront. "Mom, can we come in?" Daniel asked, voice hoarse. I stepped aside. They entered like ghosts, sitting on the couch as though it might collapse under them. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence thickened, pulsing with something unsaid. Sarah broke first. "Mom, we owe you the truth. All of it. Everything we didn't say. Everything we ignored." I tilted my head gently. "Then say it." She looked at her hands twisting in her lap. "You were right about Margaret. She's been doing things behind the scenes. Things we didn't know." I kept my voice even. "Such as?" Daniel swallowed hard, then said the words that began unraveling the entire tapestry. "Mom, her husband didn't lose his job like she told everyone. He was investigated." I stared at him. "For what?" I asked. "For embezzlement," he whispered. "Company funds. Misuse of charity accounts. A lot of money." He rubbed his forehead. "It was all over internal reports. She's been trying to keep it quiet because it'll go public next month." Embezzlement. Charity fraud. A woman obsessed with status. Dragging her family through the mud behind closed doors. "And that's why she pushed so hard to control everything," Sarah added shakily. "She's been terrified of losing influence. Terrified people will find out they're not what they pretend to be." I inhaled slowly. Not out of shock, although the revelation cut deep, but out of recognition. I'd known it. Not the details, but the energy. The desperation behind every controlling gesture, every insult disguised as refinement, every attempt to push me out. When people cling to superiority, it's always because they're cracking underneath. What does it have to do with how she treated me? I asked carefully. Daniel closed his eyes. "Mom, she's been telling Sarah for months that you were trying to replace her. That you were inserting yourself because you wanted to take over." I blinked once.
Twice.
"Take over." I repeated, stunned. "Take over what exactly?" "I've never even—" "I know," he said desperately. "I know. But she told us that if we didn't establish boundaries, you'd manipulate us." His voice cracked. "She said you were the reason she felt judged. She said you didn't appreciate her. She said that I was obsessed with being needed." I finished. They both looked up sharply. "Mom, how did you—" "Because that's what people say when they're projecting," I said softly. "Margaret needed to feel above me, superior to me. She needed control over you too, because she had none anywhere else." Sarah's face crumpled. "She also lied about the birthday money," she whispered. "She told people she paid for everything. She said you just contributed a small part." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I reached out, placed a hand on hers. "I know," I said quietly. "You were trusting the wrong person." Daniel bowed his head. He wasn't crying yet, but his voice trembled like he was holding back a dam. "Mom, I let her talk over you. I let her talk for me. I let her make decisions about our family because she was loud, and I mistook loud for correct." Behind him, Sarah nodded vigorously, wiping tears with the heel of her palm. "But that's not all," she whispered. "There's something else." I sat still, waiting. "Margaret has been sending emails to my family about you," Sarah said. "She told them you were unstable, that you were jealous of her, that you made scenes at gatherings. She even implied you had a drinking problem." A cold, slow rage slid through my veins. "Sarah," I said softly, "have you ever seen me drink anything but tea?" "No," she sobbed. "Never." She just said anything that made her look better. My breath steadied. "And you never questioned it?" Daniel shook his head miserably. Because she was older, more confident, more authoritative. Authoritative. That word again. It was the key to how Margaret built power. Not by truth. Not by respect. By confidence. By volume. By relentless, unchallenged control. But that control was now splintering. And now the final truth, Daniel said, finally lifting his eyes to mine. They were red, remorseful. Mom, the police told us everything. They said Margaret filed the complaint. They said you didn't call anyone. That she lied. She told the whole family you were trying to get her arrested, Sarah added. But the officers said she tried to weaponize the law. Against you. There it was. The final nail. Not just manipulation. Not just lies. But an attempted legal weaponization. Against the woman who raised their son. Against the grandmother who had never done anything but support them. And there's more, Daniel whispered. Julia sent us the rest of the recordings. The ones where she talks about the inheritance. About the house you own. I felt a chill settle into my bones. What about my house? I asked. Sarah hesitated, then said. She told her sister she was going to encourage us to convince you to move into assisted living eventually so the house could stay in the family. She said she'd help speed things along.
Speed. Things.
Along. A euphemism for erasing me entirely. I sat back slowly, letting the truth expand through the room like smoke. Sarah broke into fresh tears. Mom, I had no idea. I defended her. I let her talk about you like you were nothing. I feel sick. Daniel gripped my hand. We're so sorry. We should have seen it. We should have protected you. We should have. You should have listened, I said gently. Silence. Then softer. But you're listening now. Sarah covered her face. Please forgive us. Please. I looked at them, my children, bruised by truth, humbled by revelation, finally seeing clearly. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not vengeance, relief. Because the truth had done what I could never do with quiet forgiveness. It turned the tables. Completely. Permanently. And now, the healing could finally begin. But not without consequences. Because Margaret's downfall wasn't complete yet. There was one more phase. The one where I restored myself, not just in their eyes, but in my own. For the first time in a very long time, the three of us sat together on my couch like we used to. Daniel hunched forward with his elbows on his knees. Sarah curled up against the armrest, and me sitting still, steady, finally centered. But it wasn't the same as before. The silence wasn't heavy. It wasn't tense. It wasn't full of unspoken wounds. It was honest. Daniel broke it first. Mom, how do we fix this? He asked, voice raw. The question wasn't about Margaret. It wasn't about public embarrassment. It wasn't about the dinner, the police, or even the lies. He meant, how do we fix us? I took a breath. This was the moment that truly mattered. Not the revenge. Not the exposure. Not the spectacle. This. The part where I chose who I would be now that the truth had burned away the fog. I looked at my son's trembling hands, at my daughter-in-law's swollen eyes, and I said gently, we start by telling the truth. Fully. No more hiding, no more whispering behind backs, no more letting someone else shape our family. Sarah wiped her cheeks. We can do that, she whispered. We also start, I continued, by setting boundaries. Real boundaries. Daniel nodded slowly. You're right. No one, I said softly but firmly, will speak for me ever again. Not Margaret. Not anyone. And no one will treat me like an outsider in my own child's home. Sarah's voice cracked. Never again. I promise. Daniel swallowed hard. Mom, I don't expect forgiveness right away. I just want a chance to earn back your trust. His sincerity folded something inside me, gently and painfully. I love you, I told him. Both of you. That never changed. But love without respect is just duty. And I'm done living in duty. Sarah nodded with a conviction I had never seen in her before. "We want to do right by you now," she said. "We want to show Jake who his grandmother really is." A soft ache warmed my chest. 4 months. Years. I had carried the weight of being misunderstood, misrepresented, quietly stripped of dignity. Now, the people who mattered most were finally seeing me. "Then start by standing up," I said. "Not for me. For the truth." Daniel exhaled shakily. "We will." And I believed him. The days that followed felt different, gentler. Sarah came by with Jake. No excuses, no tension, just open arms and a long hug that soaked into my bones. Jake clung to me in that fierce little boy way, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt alive. Daniel called me daily. Sometimes twice. He helped fix things around the house without me asking. Not out of guilt, but out of rebuilding. They began telling people the truth. Not the dramatic version, not the embellished version, but the simple version. We didn't see what was happening. We allowed someone else to influence our family. That ends now. Some relatives were shocked. Some pretended they knew all along. Some offered apologies of their own. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the slow reweaving of the bond that had frayed under manipulation. What mattered was seeing Sarah and Daniel choose honesty.
Choose me.
Choose a future without Margaret's shadow cast over every decision. And Margaret? Well, her unraveling was just beginning. A week after the confrontation, a news headline popped up on local media. Charity board member under investigation for financial misconduct. The article was polite, professional, and anonymous. But the description was unmistakable. A middle-aged woman, known in social circles, accused of misusing charity funds. An internal leak from her husband's former company. A community now questioning her credibility. People began whispering. Screenshots circled. Facebook threads lit up like fireworks. And, because karma has impeccable timing, Margaret tried to defend herself online. She wrote long posts about jealous troublemakers. She blamed private family drama. She insisted she was innocent. But screenshots of her past comments, her deleted posts, her contradictions, her reputation for superiority, they all resurfaced. The tide had turned long before she realized she couldn't control it anymore. The woman who tried to erase me was being erased by her own lies. 2 weeks later, Sarah called me early in the morning. "Mom, you won't believe this," she said breathlessly. "What happened?" "Margaret moved out. She's going to stay with her sister for a while. She said the neighborhood is too toxic now." I almost smiled. Not because she suffered. Not because she fled. Because the truth had finally put her in a place where she couldn't manipulate anyone anymore. "She'll be fine," I said. People like her always land somewhere. But now she can't land on us. There was a pause. A long, soft one. Then Sarah whispered, "Mom, thank you. For standing up. For not becoming bitter. For giving us a chance to see the truth." I closed my eyes, letting the warmth wash over me.
"Thank you," I said.
"For choosing honesty." "Mom?" Sarah asked. "Yes." She inhaled. "Come over tonight. I'm making dinner."
"No guests."
"No drama. Just family." I smiled. "Yes," I said. "I'd love that." So here I am now. Not angry. Not defeated. Not erased. Restored. Because dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you reclaim the moment you stop asking for permission. My family finally sees me. My voice is steady. My place is no longer negotiable. And as for Margaret, well, let's just say she finally learned that silence is a dangerous place to bury the truth. It always grows back. Stronger. Sharper. And